In the spring of 1968, the American Navy faced a tragedy that remains shrouded in secrecy and speculation to this day. The disappearance of the nuclear submarine USS Scorpion was more than just a disaster. It gave rise to one of the most mysterious stories of the Cold War. The official version is technical malfunction. But is that true? Why was the loss of the Scorpion whispered about even in the Pentagon? What really happened in the depths of the Atlantic, and why do some still believe that the submarine was sunk? USS Scorpion, SSN 589, belonged to the skipjack class. It was one of the most modern submarines at the time, equipped with a nuclear reactor and torpedoes with thermonuclear warheads. There were 99 people on board. In the spring of 1968, she was in the Mediterranean and was supposed to return to her base in Norfolk, Virginia. The last radio contact with the boat was on May 21st. After that, silence. The U.S. Navy Command began searching only a few days later. And although the ship was officially considered overdue, even then the top military knew that something had gone wrong. On June 5, 1968, Scorpion was declared lost. However, bodies, debris, or the exact cause of the disaster remained unknown for a long time. What is especially disturbing is that several months before the disappearance, the Scorpion crew repeatedly reported technical problems. There were complaints about vibrations, problems with the torpedo systems, and power failures. One of the officers filed a report asking not to send the boat on another voyage, but the command ignored the warnings. USS Scorpion left the port, despite the fact that it did not pass a full technical inspection. And then, the disappearance. In the heart of the Atlantic. No distress signal, no recorded accidents. Just disappearance. Later, using hydroacoustic stations and analysis of abnormal sounds in the ocean, the military managed to roughly determine the location of the wreck. In October 1968, 740 kilometers southwest of the Azores, at a depth of almost 3,000 meters, the hull of the submarine was discovered. It lay on the bottom, broken into several large fragments. But what exactly happened? Why did a powerful nuclear submarine suddenly perish? Why did the wreckage look as if an explosion had occurred from the inside? Why were the torpedo compartments destroyed and the bow partially torn out? Among the versions discussed within the U.S. Navy, there was a hypothesis about a spontaneous torpedo launch. Allegedly, one of the torpedoes went out of control and hit the hull of the submarine itself. However, many experts considered this explanation strange. Such incidents are extremely rare, and the safety systems on board should have prevented a catastrophe. In addition, it was unclear why a distress signal was not sent in such a case. Another version sounds even more ominous. Some former officers claimed that the USS Scorpion was the victim of hostile actions. According to them, a Soviet submarine was in the area at the time of the sinking. Presumably, the Scorpion was shadowing it, and a collision scenario was possible. There are even suggestions that the Soviet submarine, believing itself to have been detected, could have launched a preemptive strike, but the mysteries do not end there. According to official data, the USS Scorpion was carrying Mark 45 torpedoes with nuclear warheads. This means that along with the crew, 2 nuclear charges are lying on the bottom of the Atlantic. The United States acknowledged this fact, but stated that there is no risk of radiation leakage. However, environmentalists disagree. In their opinion, radioactive materials can leak into the water, especially after decades. The CIA, the Navy, the NSA, all the agencies involved in the investigation have refused to declassify the materials in full. The documents related to the disappearance of Scorpion remain partially classified to this day. The Navy Commission's report was redacted. Many pages were blacked out. Why? What are they hiding? Some researchers claim that Scorpion was involved in a secret mission. Allegedly, it was supposed to eavesdrop on Soviet underwater communication cables or monitor the movement of Soviet military vessels. This explains the urgency of its departure to sea, despite the technical problems. There are also rumors that there was experimental equipment on board, which even some of the crew did not know about. And yet, despite the mass of rumors, the facts are insufficient. The boat lies on the bottom, almost inaccessible. Official explanations seem incomplete. The documents are classified. The relatives of the victims were given no explanation. And one can only guess, was it a technical error, a tragic accident, or the result of an underwater collision at the height of the Cold War? One thing is for sure. The USS Scorpion is one of the most mysterious disappearances in submarine history. The grave of 100 men lies in the cold darkness of the Atlantic, and the truth may never surface. Because sometimes what goes under the water is meant to stay there. On November 15, 2017, the Argentine submarine ARA San Juan went silent. There were 44 people on board. The last point marked in the tracking system was in the South Atlantic, about 430 kilometers from the coast of Patagonia. This disappearance was not only a national tragedy, but also a global mystery. The search operation was of an unprecedented scale. More than a dozen countries participated in it, including the United States, Russia, Great Britain, and Brazil. However, despite powerful technical resources, the days passed, and the submarine could not be found. The authorities were confused in their testimony, voiced contradictory information, and relatives of the crew members increasingly accused the government of hiding the truth. What happened to ARA San Juan? The ARA San Juan was a German-made diesel-electric submarine built in 1983. It underwent modernization between 2008 and 2014, including replacing its batteries and updating its hydroacoustic equipment. The boat was used to patrol Argentine territorial waters, including in the area where oil and gas are extracted. On October 25, 2017, the submarine set off on a combat training mission, including the task of monitoring foreign activity in the South Atlantic. On November 15, the boat was supposed to make contact at a prearranged time, but this did not happen. It became clear almost immediately that something serious had happened. The command declared an alarm, and within 24 hours more than 20 ships, satellite systems, and aircraft were involved. The Argentine Navy stated that the last radiogram received from the boat contained a message about water entering through a ventilation pipe, causing a short circuit and a fire in battery number 3. At the same time, it was reported that the situation had allegedly been localized. However, just a few hours later, the San Juan disappeared. A special twist in the investigation occurred on November 23. The Nuclear Test Ban Organization, CTBTO, which has a network of hydroacoustic sensors around the world, announced that on November 15, in the area where the boat disappeared, an anomalous hydroacoustic signal consistent with an underwater explosion was detected. This was the first real clue. However, the Argentine authorities were slow to officially acknowledge the disaster, avoiding formulations such as explosion or death. The crew's relatives began to suspect that they were being misled. An investigation began, but every step raised new questions. Why did the boat continue on its way after a short circuit? Why was there no immediate return to port? Why was the distress signal sent late? One of the most discussed issues concerned the batteries. According to media reports, the boat was equipped with batteries made in China, not intended for marine use. However, the Navy denied this, claiming that the batteries met standards. In March 2018, it became known that a few days before the disappearance, the crew complained of problems with the life support systems. Information also surfaced that the captain of the submarine sent a report to headquarters with a request to conduct an inspection. These reports caused a sharp public reaction. Relatives claimed that the submarine was sent to sea knowing about its unreliability. At the same time, rumors began to spread. Some claimed that the submarine was conducting reconnaissance of British activity in the Falkland Islands area and could have been accidentally or deliberately destroyed. Others talked about a collision with a Russian or American vessel. But none of these assumptions were confirmed. And only on November 17, 2018, exactly 1 year and 2 days after the disappearance, the company Ocean Infinity, hired by the Argentine government, discovered the wreckage of the submarine at a depth of 907 meters. The submarine was badly damaged. The stern was torn off, the bow was flattened, the central compartment was badly deformed. Judging by the location of the fragments, the explosion occurred in the front of the submarine, after which the hull collapsed from the pressure. The technical report published in 2019 confirmed that the submarine sank as a result of a sudden influx of water and a subsequent short circuit that led to an explosion of gases in the battery compartments. However, The commission was unable to give a clear answer as to why the crew did not have time to sound the alarm if they had previously reported problems. Relatives of the victims were unhappy with the report. Some experts believe that the real cause of the tragedy has never been revealed. The Argentine government has been particularly criticized for its behavior. President Mauricio Macri was accused of inaction and failure to release full information. The defense minister also came under pressure and eventually resigned. The families of the dead sailors accused the government of negligence and concealment of details of the disaster. They claimed that the crew was sent on a faulty boat, that the inspections were fictitious, and that the actual technical condition of the vessel did not meet safety requirements. The story of the ARA San Juan has become not only a symbol of technical vulnerability, but also an example of systemic problems in management and reporting. The boat disappeared, the country mourned, but trust in the government was undermined. Even after all these years, no high-ranking official has been held accountable for the tragedy. Today, Argentina has erected monuments to the crew of the San Juan, held annual memorial ceremonies, and the names of the dead sailors are inscribed in the country's history. But for their families, no words can replace the truth. A truth that may be hidden for political, military, or image reasons. The ARA San Juan was not a high-tech nuclear submarine, nor did it participate in special operations or covert missions like its predecessors in other parts of the world. But it disappeared, suddenly, tragically, with no outside influence. And that is what makes its story one of the most sinister and inexplicable in the history of the modern submarine fleet. In the winter of 1968, young Israel took delivery of a British-built submarine, the former HMS Totem, renamed INS Dakar. It was an important step for the Israeli Navy, which was looking to strengthen its presence in the Mediterranean. However, it all ended in disaster, which for many years became one of the darkest and most inexplicable pages in Israeli maritime history. INS Dakar disappeared en route from the UK to Haifa, leaving behind only a radio message and vague guesses. Its wreckage was found only 3 decades later. Why did Dakar disappear? What happened in the depths? Why is there still no single explanation? INS Dakar left a Scottish port on January 9, 1968. On board were 69 people, experienced officers, sailors, as well as specialists monitoring the technical condition of the vessel. The submarine was completely repaired and modernized. New hydroacoustic systems were installed, the engines were improved, and modern navigation aids were installed. The submarine was commanded by Yakov Aranin, an experienced submariner who had been through the war and had an impeccable reputation. The passage through Gibraltar was successful, and the submarine headed to the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea. Communication with Dakar was maintained regularly. Radio messages were received by the headquarters, and everything indicated that the mission was proceeding as planned. On January 24th, the submarine transmitted coordinates. It was approximately 350 kilometers from Crete and was sailing at periscope depth. The commander reported that he expected to arrive in Haifa in 2 days. However, this message was the last. When on January 26 the submarine did not arrive at the port and did not make contact, the Israeli headquarters became alarmed. A few hours later, an international search was launched. Ships from the USA, Great Britain, Greece, Turkey, Italy, and, of course, Israel took part in the operation. The area was surveyed from the air by aircraft, from the water by destroyers and frigates, and the latest sonars were used. However, not a single trace of the submarine was found. It soon became known that on January 25th, the Egyptian media had spread a strange message. Allegedly, the Egyptian fleet had sunk an Israeli submarine that was trying to penetrate coastal waters. But the Egyptian government quickly withdrew these words, stating that the information was not confirmed. Israel was suspicious of this version, but there was no evidence of provocation. The official version is an unspecified technical failure. But it was unspecified because not a single distress signal was recorded. Not a single trace, not an oil slick, not a piece of debris, nothing. The submarine seemed to have disappeared. And here comes a strange moment. One of the U.S. Navy's radio direction finders registered a weak, barely audible signal that could have come from the Dakar after it had allegedly sunk. The signal was not formatted, but experts claimed that its frequency and structure corresponded. to the emergency signals of the Israeli submarine. This fact was soon classified and was not officially confirmed. Some analysts claimed that Dakar could have fallen into an underwater trap, a zone of strong currents, underwater faults, and unstable thermocline layers. If a careless maneuver was made, this could lead to a loss of stability and a rapid dive. However, in this case, there should have been some signs of destruction, acoustic anomalies, floating elements, or at least traces on the surface. There were none. Other versions were even darker. According to some reports, secret underwater weapons tests had previously been conducted in the area where Dakar had supposedly disappeared. Some Israeli journalists suggested that the boat could have been the victim of an unaccounted test of a depth mine or torpedo. However, there are no documents confirming this. For decades, relatives of the crew members demanded that the search be resumed. It was not until 1999 that Nauticos, a company specializing in deep-sea operations, was able to find the wreckage of INS Dakar at a depth of 3,000 meters between Cyprus and Crete. The boat lay on the seabed in three parts. The bow, stern, and central part were torn apart, but the general condition indicated a rapid dive followed by destruction from pressure, and even then, no definitive answers emerged. An Israeli commission admitted that in all likelihood, Dakar suffered an accident due to a technical malfunction, but there is no direct evidence of this. Moreover, damage was found that was not typical for a simple hull failure due to pressure. Some engineers suggested an internal explosion, perhaps in the battery compartment or in one of the ballast system valves. Today, Dakar is remembered in Israel as a symbol of naval courage and tragedy. Memorials, plaques, mentions in museums. But there are still classified materials in the archives that can shed light on the submarine's last minutes. Why are they not published? Perhaps because the truth is inconvenient. Or maybe because it is still unknown. The story of INS Dakar is a story of silent depth. The story of how 69 people went to sea and never returned. About how a tragedy can remain without an explanation. And about how easy it is to disappear without a trace even in the seemingly familiar Mediterranean Sea.